Thank you to all of our speakers. There were three incredible talks. We're going to have a lot to discuss in the upcoming panel. We want to start the panel with some comments from Brian Anderson. Brian?
Thanks, Larry, and thanks for this time to speak with everyone. So, I'm struck by a few things that we just heard over the course of the three presentations. From Neil, we heard the important areas of consideration as we look at digital health applications, including things like a common data model, which lead to, of course, a consideration for interoperability and the importance of the flow of data between health systems or silos, as well as stakeholder engagement. And we heard from Monica a great example of that data model in MCode and the importance of building a solid foundation for that wall that she describes and how MCode fulfills that. And then we heard from Sybil a great example of one of those layers of benefit that come from a solid foundation in AI, moving from simple prediction to prescriptive recommendations and guidance that can be given to case managers to actually benefit and drive improvements in clinical outcome, all based on an ability of a algorithm that could leverage a solid foundation in a data model. And so, Larry, my only points that I'd like to make before we open it up to the panel conversation are threefold. One, the importance of engaging the patient and the clinician in any kind of effort of building digital health applications. I find that it's oftentimes overlooked that engaging and ensuring that the patient voice is part of the conversation, be it capturing patient-reported outcomes, PROs, or simply as part of the digitally capturing of information that goes into an EHR, understanding and being guided by the patient voice is critical. The next point is the value of real-world data or real-world evidence to wick away all of the kinds of work that a trialist would need to do to launch a trial can be augmented and supported by a solid foundation in a data model that would enable things like patient enrollment, patient identification, and certainly if you're using that data model, like in MCode's case, to structure the primary and secondary endpoints of a trial, you of course are streamlining and making much more efficient the trial execution and trial analysis components of it. And my final point is one of coalition building. I think we heard certainly from Neil and other speakers yesterday and today the importance of engaging the appropriate stakeholders and building a guiding coalition around any kind of opportunity in digital health, having the appropriate stakeholders, having the clinicians, the care delivery physicians, as well as the researchers and the patients and the vendors all coming together to understand what the specific use cases are and designing the applications and the technology around that are the way and the path to success, in my opinion. And that's why Mitre's role in supporting Codex, Monica had mentioned earlier, I believe is one of the most important things that we're doing at Mitre is supporting an open community of vendors, of patient advocates, of researchers to come together around digital health applications in oncology to identify the specific use cases, identify the standards, and then actually building the applications together collectively is a great opportunity and a great example of how we can come together in this health system ecosystem around the patient and driving improvements in clinical care. Those are my points I'd like to make. Back to you, Larry.
Brian, that was really terrific. Thank you very much. It really helps set the stage for our discussion. And I particularly want to call out your comments about really a community, including all of those stakeholders to try to move these issues forward. The other thing that I would say about all three of the talks and Brian's comments is the examples of use cases. These are, not, intellectual endeavors with no practical applications. These have tremendous, and in fact, I would say urgent practical applications from all three of the speakers and Brian's comments. So Thank you very much. I want to get into the questions as quickly as possible. Neil, I'm going to direct the first one to you. There was a lot of discussion yesterday from Mia Levy and Ethan Dash about patient-reported outcomes and how they were ever more important, and how we manage patients and the benefits of having them. How does Flatiron view them? Are they integrated at all into Flatiron's work? How do you see that going forward?
Yeah, so from our standpoint, it's quite clear that there's a growing body of evidence that the collection, attention to, and action upon patient-reported outcomes can improve patient outcomes, not only quality of life, but evidence that it improves the length of survival. And we saw some of those data yesterday. Flatiron's taken sort of a multi-pronged approach in this. One is through research collaborations, we've sought to add to the evidence base regarding patient-reported outcomes and their utility. And I would call attention to a recent publication by Katie Kerrigan and colleagues at the Huntsman Cancer Institute, where Flatiron assisted Huntsman in linking their patient-reported outcome data that they'd collected on patients with curated real-world data from Flatiron at their center, demonstrating a tight relationship between certain patient-reported outcome measures and key clinical outcomes such as likelihood of hospitalization within a certain time period and mortality. And so again, proof of concept with real-world data, not clinical trial data or highly controlled data, that patient-reported outcomes are actually associated with meaningful clinical endpoints and outcomes. So that's one direction we've taken. The other direction is to explore the sort of the what, how, and when implementation of a solution within Flatiron's electronic health record that would enable the collection of patient-reported outcomes for use by the physicians who use OncoEMR. Where we are with that is we're exploring. A major driver of moving forward with something like this, of course, is the demand, whether it exists or not, among providers for patient-reported outcomes. And then we're considering what would this look like? Would patients enter this from handheld devices? Would it be entered from the patient portal associated with OncoEMR? How would it be represented to the oncologists or their staffs? And how do they want it represented? What tools, what PRO tools would we actually select for implementation? And then how is this prioritized among all the other things that oncologists want to be upgraded in their EHR? So suffice it to say that we're actively exploring all of these issues in the face of mounting evidence and growing demand, frankly, for patient-reported outcomes, both for research purposes in the real world, but also for assisting with patient care.
Great, thank you, Neil. And Brian, I know you're going to have to drop off, so please, you have an urgent meeting to go to of great import, so please drop off when you need to. And thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Larry.
One of the things that we've thought about is we have a lot of databases that give us survival, either disease-free or overall survival, which has been really the hallmark of effectiveness of therapy, but very little information about treatment A versus treatment B and what the comparative quality of life standards are for patients in those two arms. And that just seems like a huge deficit in how we look at our data nationally. And I help to manage the National Cancer Database, which has very robust data on survival and nothing on quality of life and patient-reported outcomes. So I think it's just a great missing piece in a lot of our data sets. So Neil, if you could solve that problem for us in the next few months, that would be really terrific. It's a challenge. Sibel, so people were very interested in your AI platform and wanted to know if it was commercially available. You know, how could they start to duplicate some of the work that you've been doing, obviously to the benefit of your patients and your providers?
My practice piloted JV and the tool, and we developed those vectors together and put the workflows within our practice ourselves. And then now we're paying them. Yes, it's commercially available. I haven't talked to them for a while. I don't know how it is sold to the community or other academia and other practices, but I know they are commercially available. It's not enough to just get the system or pay the money, though. It really requires a lot of work on the ground with the my director of quality and her case managers. They did a lot of work before it was implemented fully, and the physicians got involved. So it is going to require some practice transformation to put that on. Otherwise, it's just another tool, and it's expensive. It's not that cheap to put any tool without having that workflow around it.
Great, thank you. Monica, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about MCode. You gave some great examples of use cases, including the clinical trials use case, and touched on registries and pathways, which are a particular interest of mine. So there's a lot going on there. But when I think about doing anything different in EHR, you know, I think about acceptance and use. You know, in your somewhat complicated multicolor slides with data sets, you know, a lot of the data are available in structured format. You just need to standardize that format, like laboratory values and, you know, vital signs and so on. But some of the critical elements can only come from a clinician. And, you know, things like performance status, which notoriously is either not in an EHR at all or not in structured data. And other critical elements. And those are sometimes, you know, the elements that are most important to understand what patient's disease status is, why they're initiating a particular therapy or why they're changing therapy, and so on. So when you think about where you'd like to be in a year or two with MCode and its acceptance into EHRs and provider acceptance, how do you think about that?
So that's a great question, Larry, and it allows me to go into something that I didn't have time to go into, given the complex issues. You know, MCode is a data language. MCode is designed to standardize the data that's collected everywhere, so that we can minimize the drag on our learning health system that is created by the need for extensive curation. That being said, there are two. Brian brought this up, two very important elements of the healthcare system that need to be fully engaged: the patients and the clinicians. And so there's no way that we will build a learning health system without being able to engage patients and clinicians in a way that allow the system to work. We do really need to re-engineer much about the clinical care environment and the way data are captured and used to make it simpler, more effective, and more rewarded for both patients and clinicians to provide the data that's needed. That's a long-winded way of saying that in every single initiative that is designed to bring on new data elements, we have to combine that with data capture mechanisms that bring value to the clinician. Let me just finish with a very specific example. Only a clinician can give us a clinical judgment. Is this patient responding to the treatment properly or not? And a clinical judgment as to whether that treatment should continue or not. That is a very nuanced decision that only a clinician can provide. Right now, there's no place, except for in the clinical note, that information can be actually provided by a clinician. So working with Epic, working with Mitre, we're developing MCode elements and structures that allow that information to be captured very simply, and that it can be captured in a way that populates the clinical note, making the life easier for the physician.
So I think you made a couple of really critical points, and if I could just add on to some of the things you said, it's really, to some extent, to give back, right? If all we're doing is asking people to do more and they get nothing in return, I think our likelihood of success is small. On the other hand, if you can create a system that takes away the need to do case report forms, or if you can create a pathway system that takes away the need to do pre-authorizations and partners with your payer, and they're one of the biggest pain points we have in practice, people will do it because, in fact, in the end, we're giving them back more than they're putting in. And one of my colleagues in the Penn Innovation Center, who started his career in hardcore IT outside of medicine, always talks about friction. They said, you want something to work, it's got to have a low friction. And you should design your systems to have low friction. I think it's just another way to think about that. I want to make one more point, Neil, and then I'll turn it over to you. One of the striking things, again, supporting what Monica just said, that Neil mentioned, is we don't know who our patients with metastatic disease are in EHR. And this has been a big problem at Penn as we've tried to do cohort analyses. How basic is it to either know or not know whether your patient has metastatic disease? If we can't even figure that out in a structured way from EHRs, we got some work to do. Neil?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add on to this comment about friction. It gets me thinking about what are the levers we have to improve the quality and completeness of data entry at point of care. How do we increase the availability of structured data, the adoption of common data models? One way, of course, is if it makes life easier for the doctor, or it's so obviously better for the patient that it highly motivates the doctor to do it. But that's only one lever, and I imagine that our ability to accomplish that as the main driver to overcome these obstacles has some limitations. So, what are some other ways that we can accomplish this goal? Well, one way is the establishment of minimum expectations regarding, data collection, standardization, structuring of critical data elements. The other is providing incentives. So, and that's, that goes beyond the physician and the patient, but involves the payer. And so, both of those additional solutions, whether it's setting minimum expectations or whether it's incentivizing, ultimately may fall into the bucket of policy, legislation, governmental potential impact. And I think we shouldn't shy away from that in terms of if we really want to make a major advance here, which everybody agrees would support improvements in public health.
One comment, Sibel, before I turn it over to you. Right now, physicians are incentivized to create long Some of us would say unusable notes to document our clinic visits so that we get paid. You spend a lot of time putting in all this stuff, which often makes it hard to even know why the patient was in the office. In fact, there's an article this week in the Annals of Internal Medicine that was just sort of a cry to turn clinic notes back into a story rather than a data dump. And I think that's worth thinking about. So maybe, as you say, lining up the incentives in a way that we're incented to put in critical information and not what we're currently doing. Sibel, you had a comment?
Yeah, I actually will make another comment before my comment, but what you said made me think. It's just the physical exam, and we have to see the patients in person and put a few data points there to do the exam. We are really in consultative medicine. We spend so much time face-to-face counseling the patient, and then do a quick exam and just to complete a lot of times it is like that. Of course, there are points where you really want to examine the patient. So that evolution is happening, and some doctors are not used to it, and hand-holding social touch is so important to them that they cannot adapt to telemedicine. Just like your ATM example, it's going to take some time, and I think there are some doctors will eventually get to it. But just like that in the EMR, I think there is a solution, but it's a very expensive solution. When I talk to Nat from Flatiron, Nat Turner, and other companies that provide EHR, there needs to be an artificially intelligent component in the EMR. It should be intelligent, that where we put data, it creates everything in a much faster and nicer way, that when somebody does research, we're talking about pragmatic trials. When you have minimal expectations and incentive questions are right, but then when you really want to get good quality of data for your research, you still need good data get in there, good important data, not the unnecessary garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. So I think there is a way to do it, but it's very expensive, and this country has many EHRs, unlike Europe, and I think it's a barrier to the advancement.
So we have, thank you very much, Sibel. We have 2 minutes left, and I don't know if anybody wants to make some parting comments. I think the potential in what the three of you have talked about is huge. I feel like all three of you are in the embryonic stages of the programs that you discussed. We need to really get to a point where this is our daily life and not an expectation. But any of you have a parting comment that you would like to make? I've rendered you speechless. In all of these workshops, the workshop should be the beginning or launch point of these a new drive in these initiatives. These initiatives have all been going on, which is why we asked you all to speak about them. But we need to be an accelerator in moving them forward successfully. So thank you all very much. At this point, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we're going to convene promptly at 10:25 Eastern Time. Again, I want to thank our three speakers and Brian, who needed to drop off for another urgency. Thank you all very much.